Sri Sai Ram. Welcome to Sri Sathya Sai Loka Seva Gurukulam. Today we are going to see the part 5 of Origin of Evolution and Introduction to Classification. We will see the answers for the previous home assignment. The first question asked was, what is mutation? Mutation is a sudden change which happens to the structure of the gene and also which will be exhibited by the organism in its phenotypic character. Define gene pool. Gene pool is a group of all the different kind of genes which is present in the population. The third question is, how differential reproduction leads to variation. The change which is happening in the genetic makeup of an organism that we have already seen as a mutation, if it happen to be present in that organism, that if it is selected by the nature, if it is advantageous, correct? So, the organism tend to retain the character which is advantageous according to the nature, and it will be persisting in that gene pool. And these species will be interacting with each other, that is the variation which is present in the organism, they will be interacting, and the nature will select some of the organism which is advantageous to be present in that particular situation. Thereby, the organism will be existing in that environment and the genetic changes will be creating a new organism which is present in that environment. Then today's learning objective, we are going to study elemental forces of organic evolution, the sources of organic variation and natural selection. First, we will see what is elemental forces of organic evolution. The evolution is caused by natural selection, right? The variation which is happening in the organism, if it is advantageous, it is selected. And the organism may have a reproductive isolation, that is the organism which is slightly different from each other may not able to do a reproduction, thereby these organisms tend to get isolated from each other, and this is one of the important phenomena which is present, and it is an elemental force of organic evolution. In that we can see the organism tend to accumulate more variation and the nature will select an advantageous character, and we can see the isolation is also a part of this mechanism. What is the source of organic variation? The variation which is arises in the individual which is present in the population. It may not happen to everyone which is present in the population, only in the few organisms. Thereby, if it is favorable and it will be spreading in that community, or if it is unfavorable, those things cannot able to spread. Those organisms may tend to get eliminated. Thereby, some organism which is having an advantageous, thereby the character will be start spreading in the population. This leads to differential reproduction. Thereby, the nature will select those advantageous character for the gene pool. Then what are the sources of organic evolution? The first one is mutation. Mutation means a sudden genetic change which happen to the organism in a single gene. If it happens, then it is known as a genetic mutation, or a set of genes, many genes, if simultaneously the variation which is happening, then it is known as chromosomal mutation. And the organism may have one more important phenomena that is known as genetic recombination. That is, sexually reproducing organism, they will get a set of gene from the father and a mother, and we could able to exhibit a distinct character, right? We can able to get a mixture of a character of father and mother. How it is possible? Because the recombination which happened in the gene, that tend to tell like which are all the characters we are tend to get it. So this is mainly happening when there is a sexually reproducing organism, when it is present in the environment. This variation is present because of the crossing over which is present in the gamete. These phenomena, if you wanted to know little bit clearly, you can study the meiosis chapter, how the crossing over which is happening leads to the recombination. And the gene flow which happens in the organism, because they are closely related species tend to mix with each other and they tend to produce an offspring, thereby two distinct gene pool will mix and then we could able to get a genetic recombination of those species, which is possible only in the sexually reproducing organism. And the fourth source is the genetic drift, and it occurs in a small population when a group which breaks from a larger population and tend to get isolated from that particular population, and only we can able to see few genes these organisms are tend to take and go, because it is a small group of organism and large group is tend to present in that environment only. Then the genes are suddenly undergoing few changes, right, in the population and also the organism which tend to move from that place. In both the organisms, based on the environmental condition, there will be few changes which is happening, and when these changes, when it is present in the environment, that tend to pass these genes in that character in that population, thereby these organisms tend to evolve as a new species. Now we will see what is natural selection. Nature will select whichever organism which is more fit for that environment, more favorable character, it tend to retain in that environment. And the organisms are having differential reproduction of the gene, that is, the organism may tend to favor the character which has to be passed to the generation, tend to reproduce. Other organisms may not get a chance to do reproduction. You can see like the birds like a cuckoo and all, it will start singing, right? When the female selects the apt organism which has an ability to sing very nicely, only it could able to select. So the other organism, other cuckoo which could not able to sing properly, it may not get a chance, right? So the favorable character will get selected and then those organisms has a chance to do reproduction, thereby those genes will be spread in that particular organism. Here we have few example. In example 1 we are seeing like DDT resistant mosquito. When a DDT was sprayed on the environment when we were not even born, when your father and mother generation, DDT was invented and it was spreaded among many rural community and also in the urban community, and thereby those people, they did not get any mosquito only, and they could able to get so much of peaceful environment. Now if you will spray DDT, these organisms won't even die. That is because mosquito started accumulating DDT resistance in its gene pool. Similarly, we have example 2 in that metal tolerance in grasses. When first time the road was constructed and the petroleum vehicle was moving in the road, then the most of the shrubs and plants which were present around that environment tend to die because of the force and also the heat generated and also the toxic chemicals which was released. Now you can see that the grass and everything is growing everywhere, right? Near the roads also you can see these are growing because the grass tend to accumulate more resistant to some of the pollutions such as metal. Example 3 is industrial melanism in the moth. This is a very classical example. This was studied in Great Britain where there is an industrial revolution started. That time so much of carbon which was released in the environment, and these carbon tend to accumulate in the moth. Here in the example we have a picture of Biston betullaria. These organisms, one will become very light, the other will become very dark. This is a classical example. Because of the carbon which tend to accumulate in the environment, the organism tend to accumulate more and more of black color in their body, thereby it got escaped from its predator. When it is very bright in the dark background, it can be easily detected and it will be eaten, right? So this is a classical example for the natural selection where the organism tend to get selected based on the environmental need. So what is reproductive isolation? one new species arises from the parental population, right? And that too we can able to see some of the variation which is present, and natural selection is also playing a vital role in the organism's survival. Here, when a reproductive barrier when it is present, then these organisms cannot able to produce an offspring, thereby the gene flow between the species is not at all possible. So, exchange of character or the gene is possible only through a reproduction which happens between the species. If it is not present, then it is known as reproductive isolation. There are two related species, they cannot able to mate and then to produce the offsprings, then they will remain distinct. Eventually, they will be having a reproductive isolation, and thereby the organism tend to become a separate species. What is an ecological isolation? The reproductive isolation may be because of various things, maybe because it is present in geographically two distinct areas. These organisms may not have a chance to even meet. Then these organisms cannot able to do reproduction, right? So this is known as ecological isolation. They are living in geographically in different area. Then the next is seasonal isolation. The reproductive organ mature in some species during a specific part of the year. If the organisms are having a different seasonal sexual maturity, then these organisms tend to get isolated from each other. Ecological isolation. Ecological isolation is a behavioral isolation which is present in the organism. It is given by an example of singing birds, two species which is having a separate songs for attracting its mate. Similarly, we can able to see the color which is present in the feathers are also different. It may be a fur color or it may be a feather color. Here, the fish color is also different. Based on that, the organisms tend to identify its partner very well, because there is a proper distinct shape and structure and then pattern which is present in the skin of the organism. Thereby, the organisms tend to have isolation in its reproduction. Then mechanical isolation, some of the physical isolation behavior that may not allow the organism to produce the offsprings. Zygotic and developmental role in the reproductive isolation. Sometimes hybrid zygotes may be produced, but these zygotes cannot able to survive. Two different species when it is producing a organism, this may happen. And this zygote when it dies, there is not possible like these two gene pool combined together, it will produce a new kind of genes which is present in the environment. The hybrid sterility is the next mechanism in which the organism tend to produce an offspring which is sterile. Mule is an organism which is produced between horse and donkey. These organisms are sterile, so they cannot able to produce an offspring and spread the genes in the gene pool. Sometimes the other mechanism like F2 breakdown can take place. Here the hybrid can be produced and then it has an ability to reproduce, but only for one generation. The next generation it will become sterile or it cannot able to produce any offsprings. Thereby the organism tend to break its flow of gene to the next generation. This is known as F2. F2 means the second generation the organism cannot able to produce. F1 is the first generation organism such as mule. The second generation is between that they are tend to produce an offspring, but in the second generation they cannot able to produce a sterile babies. Now we will see home assignment 5. The first question is how hybrid sterility differ from F2 breakdown. The second question is what is ethology? Explain its role of reproductive isolation. Hope you understand the lessons properly. We came to the end of this chapter. You please watch other videos for better clarity. Thanks for watching. Om Shri Sai Ram.